All right. Well, welcome everyone. Let me start with some housekeeping items and then some brief introductions. As I said before, we're so glad that you're here to discuss WAIRE with us today. We certainly want this to be an interactive session. We know we have quite a few different types of people on the call, from those that maybe are just starting their WAIRE journey or are just getting aware of what WAIRE is, to those that have fully functioning programs and are looking to optimize them. So certainly our intent here is to provide content that's valuable for all. As part of that, again, we want this to be interactive, but as it starts out right now, you are muted and off screen, but we do welcome you to join us at any time by raising your hand, and then we can bring you on screen if you like, or obviously there's a chat or a Q&A if you just prefer to put your questions or question in the chat, and we will monitor that and answer that as we go along. But in particular today, you'll have myself, Eric Waldron. I'm the VP of Compliance here at Renaissant. So at Renaissant, one of the things that I'm focused on is understanding where our regulations going next, particularly regulations related to ISR or WAIRE. During the course of understanding that, I've been able to build some strong relationships with the regulators. And coming from, before I got to Renaissant, I had a deep background in kind of public accounting and public companies. So I've got quite a bit of regulatory background. So with that in mind then, and again, with the idea that we want this to be an interactive session. So if you have any particular stories about WAIRE or things you want to add in, again, we'd ask you to raise your hand or put your note in the Q&A. But presenting with me today as well is Melinda. So I'll let Melinda say a few things about herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melinda. I am the Customer Success Manager here at Renaissant and one of the WAIRE compliance experts alongside Eric. I am based here in the Inland Empire. Funny enough, I actually started off as a Renaissant client before joining the Renaissant team. So my background is 14 plus years in transportation, warehousing, and operations. It's nice to meet everyone. If anyone wants to dive deeper or has any on-site specific questions after today, I'm more than happy to set up a one-on-one session with you guys.
Thank you, Melinda. And just as a final kind of housekeeping note, certainly we will be sending out all the materials that you see today after the session is over. Okay, so who is Renaissant? You're probably wondering, who is Renaissant? How did they get into this ISR, this compliance game? Well, Renaissant was started over 6 years ago. It was really a focus on site security, yard access, how do you reduce freight theft? And so when you think about what ISR is and the compliance, a lot of the solutions that we had built around that core security focus played themselves very well to ISR reporting. So in other words, we track trucks using computer vision, where we record that and can classify that. So it was an easy pivot into the solution. Also, we didn't see a lot of other players in the space. And in fact, to our knowledge, there's nobody that quite does it the same way that we do it. So we feel fairly unique in that. But in general, when we're not working on compliance solutions, what we're trying to do is reduce costs, particularly as it relates to gate transactions, yard, and dock. And then ultimately, another value that we bring is we use communication, and I see it in two ways: people-to-people communication. So our software and the way that we communicate and guide people is translated into over 160 different languages. But just as important is that computer-to-computer communication. So one of the things that makes us unique is we can kind of integrate seamlessly with these various systems that you're probably dealing with as a warehouse operator, potentially as a warehouse owner, but more likely as a warehouse operator, your TMS, your YMS. So there's a variety of different things that Renaissant does. But in particular, again, it's around security and access, gate automation, and compliance. And Melinda, you had mentioned kind of you're a former Renaissant customer, now a Renaissant employee. Can you just give a little bit of color on that? How have you seen Renaissant changed? How was it from using it as a customer to now being one of the people that provide solutions to our various clients?
As a former client, working with the company prior to this one, my team originally used Renaissance platform just for ISR reporting. But once I actually got into the system and I saw other features, I realized there was so much more value across the board that the solution could provide. Since being a part of the company, I've watched our platform evolve with many versions. Well, we're going into our third version of quicker processes, more automation, and a lot more efficiency at not just the ISR level, but the gate, yard, and dock level as well.
Appreciate that. So enough about Melinda and I, enough about Renaissant. Let's get on to what we're here to talk about, and that is WAIRE. It also goes by the term Rule 2305. Indirect source rule is maybe another thing here. So what is it? What is the goal of this rule? Well, really, it is kind of a carbon tax. I hate to break that down to you, but basically what it's trying to get at, it's a scheme or regime that tracks the trucks that would be coming to your warehouse locations, in particular those diesel emitting trucks, tries to determine how many they're coming to your location, what the impact of those are, and then asking you as a warehouse operator in particular, not so much the owner, but the operator of the warehouse, to offset that with a variety of different things. The good news is if you have warehouses outside of this limited, what they call the AQMD or Air Quality Management District, which in particular is Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, and urban areas of Los Angeles County, this rule is not applicable to you yet. It's just applicable to those areas. And again, locations that are over 100,000 square feet, although there's a little nuance. If you're renting at least 50,000 square feet in a location that's over 100,000, then this rule, again, would apply to you. And so again, in particular, what we're trying to focus on, or what the rule is trying to focus on, is it's monitoring and measuring the truck pollution that may result from your truck visits. It's trying to determine how do you mitigate that through various different investments. So those can be investments in solar, EV yard trucks. It could also be paying a fee if you'd like. And really the goal of the rule is to try and mitigate any pollution that may be resulting. Now, to be clear, this is not Renaissance rule. We don't want you to kill the messenger. We just want to reinforce the intent as with all these things, is probably good, right? The intent is to try and reduce emissions impact, but obviously we, as probably you, can get frustrated by both the regulator and the regulation itself. But we're really here to try and make it as efficient and as seamlessly for you to comply as possible and to answer questions that you may have as you're dealing with this regulation. As in most regulations, it kind of comes to a loop, right? It's this loop of you've got to monitor your activity. Then based on the monitoring of the activity, that's going to determine what I call the liability, what your carbon tax is, if you will. Then you got to decide, what are you going to do about that? So again, you can pay the fee, you can invest in some things, then ultimately you got to report. And again, the two main aspects of reporting on this are for the warehouse owners. That's generally just a one-time report where you file with the AQMD. Basically, you're giving them the scope of the locations that should be considered for this rule. And then really the reporting that's more meaningful and reoccurring is that of the operator of the warehouse, because they have an annual reporting requirement as well as that initial reporting requirement. So there's some technical terms we're going to use. We don't want you to get confused about that. Certainly ask questions at any time. But again, I just reinforce back to you that this is basically a program that says, hey, you've got to determine what you owe, if you will, based on your truck trip visits. And then you got to determine how you're going to quote unquote pay. And so again, there's a variety of different ways that you pay, from cash to making different investments. But I know Melinda is someone who's dealt with a lot of different customers at your time at Renaissant and even before when you were a client at Renaissant. What do you think people misunderstand about this rule?
The one thing that I see all the time on both the owner and the operator side of things is that people just really don't understand what the WAIRE program is really truly trying to accomplish. Once I break down what it is, what's required, and why the program matters, people kind of go from stress to calm really quickly. And that's really because Renaissant has built such a strong working relationship with South Coast AQMD. The regulators aren't bad to work with. They actually are pretty responsive once you figure out where you're at in the process and how South Coast can support you. They really are extremely helpful. But I think the biggest misconception or misunderstanding is that people just don't understand what the WAIRE program is trying to accomplish with emissions.
So, all right, you have an intent of what the rule is, right? So again, it's a carbon tax regime. But then who are the key players in this rule, in this regime? Well, let's start with the top. So hopefully you can see my cursor, but the idea is the regulator. So the regulator, which is called the Air Quality Management District, also South Coast AQMD, or simply AQMD, they go by a variety of different acronyms. They wrote the rule, they interpret the rule, and they enforce the rule. So in essence, they're kind of the god, if you will, of ISR. And what they've set up in order for you to report and for them to monitor your activity, they've set up this WAIRE portal. So basically, your interaction as far as reporting all goes through this WAIRE portal. And who does that impact? So that impacts owners. So again, as we've talked about, owners, you're kind of off the hook if we have any owners on the call today, because really all you have to do is keep your sites registered. So if there's any large change in square footage or certainly change in tenants, then you've got to re-register. And again, to be clear, this is a registration for each site or each location. That's not you as a company. So, if you're an owner that owns hundreds of locations in the Inland Empire, it's not like you just register once. You have to register each one of those locations. Obviously, you can register that under the same company name, but each one does have to register. And so really where the rubber meets the road and where Renaissant is obviously the most beneficial and the people that have the most to do are those that are the warehouse operators. Because not only do you have to do this kind of initial report, kind of identifying yourself and some key demographic information about contacts and size, but then you also have to do the annual report. And certainly the annual report is what is the more complex report to do, because that is requiring you to track all your truck trips to your location throughout the year, and not only track them, but also then classify the type of trucks they are, and then ideally identifying if any of those trucks that came to your location are EV, what we call zero emission or near zero emission trucks, because you'll get credit for that. Because again, going back to this idea that this is really kind of a carbon tax regime, to the fact that you're using trucks that are pollution reducing or zero emission, that is really kind of what the AQMD is trying to get at. It's trying to get at those types of activities. So they want to encourage you to do that, and that's why they encourage you to try and use those trucks. So Melinda, as someone who has kind of regular contact with all these parties, and including the portal, so the regulator, owners, operators, is there something that you might say about each one of these parties and how they face the regulation, or something that might be unique to each one of these parties?
The regulators, like I said previously, they're actually very responsive. They really do want to help, people successfully register and report every year. The WAIRE portal itself is pretty simple, but most people only go in there once a year, because what's that phrase? If you don't use it, you lose it. So people only really go in there once a year. So when it comes time for January, they get a little confused because they haven't been in there all year. But the portal itself is very user friendly. The owners don't have really much to do other than register, but they can earn points for their tenants if they choose. The operators, I think the operators carry the heaviest part of the load here, because they are responsible for trip tracking and annual reporting. But it's all encompassed, and every step is needed to successfully register and report.
In the center, but to be clear, you don't need Renaissant. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, as there are with most cats. But certainly we would encourage, I mean, if you're using spreadsheets, if you're using different processes, if there's a way that you can automate that data capture, we always think that's a benefit. That's certainly something we can do, but there's other ways to do that. If you can forecast what your WAIRE liability is, which is again, is to kind of project forward. So by say June or July, how many truck trips have you had, assuming you kind of have a steady state of truck visits, to the fact that you can forecast that and see where's my liability. Is my near zero emissions and zero emission trucks going to take care of it? If not, what do I want to do? Do I want to invest in some solar? Do I want to invest in an EV yard truck? You can kind of make those decisions before year end. Clearly, you're going to want something that's going to ease your reporting burden, as you can imagine. Some locations that we're dealing with have hundreds and hundreds of truck trips a day. So you think about how many that will be over the course of the year. So you're going to want a way that you can kind of search through that and get to final numbers. And then ultimately, another thing that we'd want to stress is auditability. So South Coast, now just to be clear, South Coast doesn't have their own independent data. They're relying on you to report accurately. But one of the questions that came in, and this will be timely to answering that question, is what's their enforcement capability? Someone had submitted, in the WAIRE program, who's the enforcer of the regulation? So particularly on truckers, so the way I read this question is maybe on carbs. So that again is not something that, there is different refrigerated trucks regulation. So if that's what that's trying to get at, that's kind of a little different topic than we're going to talk about today. In particular, though, where the AQMD comes in is they've taken a unique approach to enforcement, right? Because trucks normally that's kind of an interstate activity that'd be regulated by the Department of Transportation. But what they're trying to say with this rule is the warehouse is static, much like other things they might look at, like an incinerator or a power plant. Those are other things where they have regulations. That's kind of a static pollution source. They're saying the warehouse is a static pollution source, but obviously the warehouse itself doesn't emit much pollution. It's kind of the trucks that might come and go to it. And so that's kind of where they come in as a regulator. But to be clear, they do have a regulatory arm, and that's where I'd go back to this auditability, because they're going to ask you to prove out your numbers, right? And how do you do that? Well, obviously, there's a variety of different ways you can do that. If you have spreadsheets, if you have logs, you'll be able to show them those. But we'd like to think we've got a great solution, right? Because we use a camera vision approach. So basically, everything you report, you're going to have a picture of that truck. You're going to have a timestamp of when it came and went. That's pretty bulletproof audit evidence in our opinion. So Don, hopefully I've answered your question there with what you were trying to get at with the enforcers and the EV regulation. So in particular, South Coast doesn't regulate what is an EV truck or not, but they certainly want to give you credit for what one is.
These 5 steps here are, the blueprint of how to successfully register and file. So the first step in the first question that I always ask either new clients or, potential clients is, have you registered your location? And most of the times it's a yes or a no, or it's a, I didn't even know that I needed to do that, right? So South Coast has what's called the WAIRE portal. That's where you go to register. And I want to reiterate that owners and operators both should be registering their location, even if it's a shared responsibility, even though the owner is going to be doing most of the filing. It is important that both the owner and the operator are registered. The next step is you're tracking your truck trips. So your truck trips are classified by 2B through 7 and class 8s. And so you have to make sure that you're tracking each specific type of vehicle coming in. Also, you need to be tracking your zero, near zero, or your EV vehicles that are coming in as well, in order to obtain WAIRE points or credits. The third step is earning those points, which brings us back to the near zero emission trucks that come into your yard, because those are how you obtain those mitigation offsets. I always tell people all the time, are you sure you don't have any near zero emissions coming into your yard? Sometimes they say they're unclear. Sometimes they say, no, we don't, and they actually do. So being able to identify what those look like if you're using or utilizing a manual process is very important, because you leave a lot of money on the table when you don't properly file the classes. You could be paying way an exorbitant amount of money and you don't necessarily have to. The fourth step is to report and file. No matter what, January 31st is the deadline to file. They do not give out extensions. I always tell my clients, make sure that you're starting to look into the data reporting that we provide monthly to our clients in late part of November all the way through December, and start filing Jan 1st through the 31st. That's the cutoff. They don't give any extensions. The final step is retaining records. South Coast requires that you obtain at least 7 years worth of data in the event that you are audited, because I always say it's not when you'll be audited. It's not if you'll be audited, it's when. So making sure that you have those records to produce at a possible audit's notice is extremely important. Eric, a lot of people forget that last step. What would you say about document retention?
Well, it's important. You can't forget the last step, and in part, I'm probably betraying my prior, history. So I sadly admit I'm a recovering auditor. The one benefit of that is that it gives me a special, unique skill, much as Liam Neeson might have in the Taken movies. And unfortunately, I can't track down kidnap victims and beat up bad guys like him. But what I can do is read a lot of long, what some people might call mind-numbing regulations, and not fall asleep, like this ISR regulation. And also, importantly, I can review the data that supports it. And so when those auditors come, and they will come, because enforcement is increasing. So when AQMD first rolled this out, it's been a lot on, all right, what is this? Trying to make people aware. We still find people that aren't aware, so they haven't even completed that step. But now they're trying to move more into enforcement. So They're both kind of going out and looking for locations. So they literally have people driving around and making sure locations are registered. Clearly, you've had owners that have kind of reported locations, and you might not have operators filing those. Sometimes the operator's ahead of the owner and knows about the regulations, and so they filed their location. And so they have started their audit regime. And one of the things that certainly should be important in any document retention is how secure and safe is the data. So at least in our case, it's stored online, and hosted in safe environments. So you don't have to worry about your data disappearing. It'll be there for 7 years for sure, longer if you need it. Also, then what is that? How are you going to get that information to the auditor? So again, if you have oodles of spreadsheets and things like that, or you're trying to download things out of your TMS system, it may not be the most approachable data. But in our case, you can literally send them a picture and a timestamp of each transaction, and that'll show your record very clearly to them. And also importantly, one thing to kind of talk about is the automatic classification, and we'll get into that in further slides. But our system again is automatically classifying things, so you don't have to worry about any manual mistake or manipulation in that classification of trucks. So again, that's the class 2B through 8, but also very importantly, if it's an EV truck. So don't forget that last step. Make auditors, former auditors like myself, happy. Make sure you retain those records. It's a shame to go through all that hard work. It's almost kind of like when my kids have to go to math class. They have to show their work. So they might get to the right answer, and you might get to that 4th step and report and file and comply. But unless you can get to that final step, which is show your work, it's all going to be for naught, because then they'll probably question what you reported, or it'll just be a big administrative burden to try and meet their audit data requests. So that's what I'd say about record retention and document retention.
It all starts with the first step.
Yep. First step, but it's a cycle, right? And it's a process. So it's again to show you, just because the year is done doesn't mean that you don't have to keep a record of what you did for that year in the final step.
These are the classifications that follow the Department of Transportation, the DOT weight classes. These are the specific vehicle classes that South Coast AQMD is requiring facilities and warehouses to support. To report, I apologize. Class 2B through 7s. Class 7s count as one weighted trip. So those are going to be the first the first 2 blocks of vehicles that you see here. The class 8 trucks, those tractor trailers, they count as 2.5 weighted trips. So the bigger the class, the more weighted trips it's counting as. A big tip is to make sure that you're capturing those electric vehicles or those near zero emissions that we talked about in a couple slides back. Those save you guys a lot of money. I always joke that when Amazon trucks pull up to the house, I'm usually losing money, but in rare reporting, when Amazon near zero emissions or zero emissions trucks pull up, we're actually saving money in credits. So this is just a quick example of what those trucks look like that South Coast is needing reporting data on.
All right, math. No one likes to talk about this, Melinda, but can you make the presentation of the math interesting for our audience here?
Yeah, so the AQMD has a calculator that they provide on their web portal that can break down WATT, stringency, and WAIRE points compliance obligation. But so does Renaissant. Both will show you WAIRE obligations, basically what your tax is, and how your near zero emission truck trips can offset your number. The moments that people get most excited about is when our calculator shows how much they owe, and we'll get to the next slide, but it'll make more sense that when they owe nothing and our calculator is able to show them that their obligation is $0, our clients really love that. However, South Coast, they do have a calculator, but it doesn't really show you what your obligations are trending for those 12 months. Tracking and forecasting through the year is the most important, because the ESG team can plan ahead instead of scrambling at the end of the year for the reporting cycle. Eric, I know even though you're a CPA, even you hate this kind of math and calculating these taxes. So how do you deal with it from a CPA aspect?
Well, again, so not I'm a recovering auditor, but I'm a recovering CPA. And although you might think I like the word tax and calculations, that's not the case. I like to keep it simple. And so that's why I love to use the calculators. But one of the things I want to stress is, again, when you see terms like watts and stringent, what's a stringency? I had to look that up when I first saw it. Let's really break those down what they are before we jump off the slide. So again, in basic terms, what is watts? That's where you're tracking those trips that are coming and going and calculating based on what type of truck it is. So again, as we see here, this class 8, that's costing you double, almost triple. It's 2.5 points versus the 1 point for the other trucks. Stringency is kind of an AQMD factor. That's basically, how into the regulation do you have to be? What is the truck costing you? The regulation kind of ramped up over time. So that's kind of an AQMD factor. Again, that'll be in the calculator. You don't have to worry so much about this. AQMD will give you that factor. A calculator will give you the factor. But what you do have to worry about is, darn it, you need to know your trucks that are coming and going from your location throughout the whole year. And then ultimately, that gets to this. What is WPACO? There's probably some swear word you could make out of this, but ultimately, that's your tax. That is what you're going to owe. So again, owe in a variety of different ways. So you can buy your way out of it. You can invest your way out of it. But the WPACO, that's what's going to wacko you, because that's what you're going to owe once you figure out what your truck trips are, what AQMD is saying that's kind of the carbon liability of those trips. And then here's how you're going to have to offset it. You're going to have to earn a certain number of points to offset that liability. So let's get out of this math, should we? And get to an example of a calculator, which Melinda knows well, and she can maybe walk you through an example of the Renaissant calculator.
So this is an example of what our software calculator looks like. It auto populates from our camera vision truck data. It forecasts your annual WAIRE liability. It shows how much money you can potentially be saving from having those zero, near zero emission truck credits. My clients love this because it helps them plan for their annual mitigation fees early instead of being surprised at the end of the year, because then they're able to kind of build it into their budget. But for our software purposes, for this example, the projected annual mitigation fee would be $46,000. Because our software is accurately capturing all of your truck trips so accurately, we've been able to capture $51,000 in credits, meaning you subtract that from that 46, and now you have an actual credit here, which would give you no obligation to pay South Coast AQMD. I think that that's the most important and the most beautiful thing about our software is it takes that guessing component that most people have of how much am I going to pay? Do I really owe? Am I properly classifying? Am I properly capturing the data that's required? And our software takes care of all that worry for you, and it will break down potential credits that you have. But remember, those credits only come if you guys are having zero, near zero emission traffic coming in and out of your location. Our calculator also breaks down in that bottom left-hand corner. It also breaks down the amount of visits per year as how much points that you can accumulate through the entire cycle of the year. So, and it breaks it down by any compliance year. So say that, you are out of compliance or you're behind in compliance, you can do kind of sort of like a calculation or kind of formulate previous filing numbers based off of the data that we compile for you. You can kind of just, if your volume doesn't change, you're able to capture different compliance years. You're able to break down the size of your warehousing, which will give you even more accurate data. If you look in the top right-hand corner where it says class 2B through 7s and class 8s, those are the amount of trips per year that you'll see if it's trending day over day, the same amount of volume, it calculates and classifies. There isn't any math that you need to do. And these numbers are the numbers that you would be providing to South Coast AQMD. There isn't any math that you need to do. There's no adding, subtracting, dividing. Our software takes care of all of those issues for you. They take care of all those calculations for you. And it's 100% accurate. Well, 99.99% because anything 100%. But the small, slim percentage of inaccuracy is only due to, cameras down, power loss, or anything like that. But for the most part, our software is 100% spot on. And that's just how our calculator works. I know, Eric, we've helped some clients increase their EV truck visits to reduce their work compliance costs. Can you explain maybe how people could potentially do that?
Yeah, absolutely. As I look at this slide, and my kids always say to me, Dad, why do I have to do this math? Why do I have to do my homework? ChatGPT will do it. So this is our version of ChatGPT. They'll get it done for you. But what's important is it'll give you a direction. It'll give you a forecast, right? And so one of the things, obviously, you hear us stressing is the use of EV and so zero emission and near zero emission trucks. And why do we stress that? One, because you got to have trucks coming and going from your warehouse. So they can be diesel or they can be zero emission or near zero emission. So you're going to have trucks coming or going. Why not work with your carrier and your broker in order to increase those trucks so that you do get more EV, so you get more zero emission trucks. You have to have them come anyways. And what Renaissant has been able to do, and again, we don't get paid for this. This is no benefit. This is just, trying to build good relations with our customers as well as with our other, third-party logistics partners, such as a CH Robinson. We can connect you. We can connect you with a CH Robinson or other carriers that have EV trucks. And so when you're thinking about your transportation solutions, you work with those partners and you kill, two birds with one stone, right? You need to have a truck come and go. So you need that already. So why not make it a zero emission or near zero emission truck? And we can connect you with the brokers that can make that happen. And again, that's no additional cost to you. That's no benefit to us other than the goodwill it creates with you and it creates with our other partners. And kind of on that note, we saw another question come into the chat, and it was talking about watts. So again, that's that weighted annual truck trips, or in essence, what's the trucks that are coming and going from your location? And the question was, is that just on non-zero emission or low emission trucks? No, you are tracking zero emissions trucks, right? And that is important to track them because they're going to give you the credit. Now, so what I would say is you still need to track those, the weighted annual truck trips of the zero emissions and the non-zero emission truck trips. But instead of them costing you, they actually provide you a benefit, at least a benefit as it relates to paying your WAIRE tax or meeting your WAIRE compliance obligations. So to answer that question, nope, you do need to calculate those EV trucks as part of your watts, but they're not going to hurt you. They're only going to benefit you. So hopefully that answers Don's question on that one. Okay, so probably enough looking at calculators. Let's keep moving on here and let's try and get out of the math section. So Linda, you want to share a little bit with, again, we've had this calculation, so it's going to show people what they're going to pay. Can you talk to them a little bit? How do they pay their tax?
Yeah, so these are investment options that you guys can use to pay the WAIRE tax. All payments can be made electronically through the WAIRE portal, but if you prefer, which, like my mom, some people are still doing things the old school way. You guys can still send in like a physical check to South Coast AQMD. But the way, like Eric spoke to earlier, the way that you guys can get points and obtain points is through near zero emissions trucks visits coming into your yard. You can also obtain those through, if you guys have yard hostlers, if you guys have charging stations for those yard hostlers, or yard goats, however you guys call those amazing people that move those trailers dock door to dock door. Installing solar panel is another way to offset the mitigations. You can purchase new or used near zero emission vehicles of your own if you like. That's a costly option. I would definitely say, talk to your local carriers and see if there's an option for them to be, shuttling over those near zero emissions at no cost to you, if that's a possibility. Customizing a plan, owning the owner operator to earn WAIRE points for each item. That's something that I'd like Eric to kind of talk to, because custom planning is like is a very viable option. Eric, you want to share what your knowledge has been or your experience has been with customer WAIRE plan?
Sure. And before I get into custom WAIRE plans, I just want to emphasize one thing, right? So you can buy your way out, right? You can pay $1,000 per point. But what we would always encourage is, why give the cash when you can get other benefits, right? Again, the benefit of you have these trucks coming and going, so take credit for that. You may get an operating benefit, right? So if you use certain like EV charging stations or electric yard goats, we found some customers, not only do they meet their WAIRE obligation, but they get a 2-for-1 because they actually get lower operating costs. And ultimately, you can acquire some of these vehicles yourself. But let's say those solutions don't necessarily work for you. Maybe you don't have room to put solar panels at your location, but you want to put them at another location. That's where the custom WAIRE plan comes in. So just an analogy, you can buy a spec home, right, one that's already designed, and the AQMD has what they call a menu. So they're WAIRE menu. So those are pre-approved activities that give you certain points and credits for doing them. So again, that could be installing these solar panels. It could be changing some filters to a higher filter level. But you can also come up with a custom plan. So if you have a great idea of how to reduce emissions. So again, going back to the idea, this is a carbon tax. And the way that you kind of meet that carbon tax is by reducing emissions. If you have a great or custom way of doing that, the AQMD wants to hear that. They're, like we said before, they're not terrible to work with. They're open-minded. They ultimately, ideally want to reduce pollution. And so they're interested in your ways to do that. So you can kind of come up with a custom plan. What I wouldn't even suggest to you, what is required is you have to obviously draft that plan. You have to submit it to the AQMD, and then they have to review and approve it. So just because you have this great idea doesn't mean that AQMD is going to accept it. And so typically when people go down that scenario, it's part of a large kind of project. They may bring consultants on board, or maybe if you have an ESG function or environmental function within your company, they probably are well suited to creating the plan that can be presented to the AQMD, explaining to them, answering their questions, and ultimately getting approval. But it's a way of saying, hey, there's nothing that's quite off the table. You can always create these custom plans if other things aren't going to work out. Okay. All right. So Melinda, you want to talk to them about where they're going to file the report?
This one's easy peasy, guys. This is the link to the WAIRE POP portal where you register and you file. I'd like to note one fee Renaissant can't get you out of is your annual filing fee. So if you haven't paid anything, you're not done with reporting. So when you guys come into this WAIRE POP, whether you're registering or you're filing, there is a fee associated with both. So the registration fee at the end of your registering, it will prompt you, I believe it's like $153 fee. It will not let you move forward with filing your AWR, your annual WAIRE report, until that portion is complete. Same thing goes for when you are ready to file. If you're not prompted a fee, or if it shows that you don't owe any obligation, which is what I wish all my clients had, was no obligation, it won't let you move past the completion portion. So making sure that any fees associated with it are paid up front. Your registration or your filing isn't complete unless those fees are paid. January 31st is a firm deadline. Like I said earlier, guys, there are no extensions given here. Your report is only complete once you get an email confirmation as well. So you will have a confirmation that your filing or your registration portion is complete. Eric, is there anything that I missed here on this one? I think this one was pretty simple.
Well, there is one fact I'd like to share with all those on the call. Basically, you are on the call with the only person in the history of the AQMD and soon to be in the Guinness Book of World Records as the only one that's able to do this. Yours truly, Melinda, not myself, to be very clear, Melinda got an extension. Now, to be clear, she wasn't just for one of our clients. It was a global extension during those terrible fires that were just in Los Angeles recently. So she contacted the AQMD on behalf of a client. And the AQMD said, well, that's pretty darn smart, Melinda. You're right. We probably should have an extension. But we've heard from the AQMD that is not typically how they operate. We always like to use the analogy, God forgives, the AQMD doesn't. So you can't typically get an extension like you might in other kind of tax filing reporting. So you do have to file by that deadline. They will not give, so even if you have an individual burden, they will not give an individual extension. In the case of what Melinda got, it was a global extension for extenuating circumstances for everyone. Yeah, I see the chat got some claps. Tom, we appreciate that love. I think she can get an award. Okay, all right.
I'm for all the people, all the people.
She's all the people.
Not for all the people. I'm here to help.
She's missing her calling. She can run for governor when Gavin Newsom goes off to be president.
Oh my goodness.
So, all right. So now we're going to start to bring it in for a landing here. Obviously, the prior conversations were about, what is this regulation? Who are the key players? What are some of the data you need to gather? When do you need to report by? How, in essence, do you pay your tax? Now, let's get a little bit more back into the theoretical and hopefully get you started part. So as we started the call with, we said we realized there's a variety of different people on this call. Some of you guys may already have a great program in place. And then for you, the idea is, how do I make this more efficient? How do I get the most out of it? And so I think there's solutions and ideas we have for you on how to do that. But for other you might be a little bit behind. Maybe you haven't even done your initial registration. Maybe you're not effectively gathering your data. And so if you feel like you're behind, what do you do? Well, number one, it starts with data capture. You're going to have data reports. So whatever that is, if it's looking at spreadsheets, if it's logs, if it's having a gate guard or a gate clerk, simply scribbling things down on a piece of paper, you got to start with something. If it's looking back in your TMS systems, you got to start with something. So once you start getting data, then what are you going to do with it? So most likely, if you're just getting data now, you're not going to have a full year's worth of data. Well, then again, that's where you're going to have to come up with an estimation method, or, how do I take, maybe let's say you can get a full month of December's data. Then how am I going to project that across a full year's of activity? So again, to the extent that you have kind of a typical level load of activity, then maybe December is reflective. Well, maybe for like a lot of warehouses, December is probably a very busy time, right? Because you've got Christmas inventory coming in and out. So that may not be reflective. So, your December may be your highest volume month, or maybe your November is your highest volume month. So then you've got to come up with what is your strategy to use the data you do have to make a fair estimate. And so that's where you develop your strategy in 3. And then what we would kind of encourage you to do is, contact the AQMD. Again, as we've said, they're reasonable. Tell them what your situation is. Hey, we've just really started an effective data gathering regime. Here's how we're collecting our data. Here's how we feel like this data can be used for full year reporting, and get their feedback. Just talk to them early. Don't put your head in the sand. And, so that's what I would suggest on that one. All right. So again, maybe let me talk to you about a few common pitfalls to avoid. Again, as we're just trying to summarize some of the things we talked about. Poor records. This is all about record keeping. So however you're going to get your records, make sure they're detailed, make sure they're auditable. Going to the AQMD and saying, hey, sorry, we don't track data, that's not easy data to get, that's not going to be a winning answer for you. Don't miss the deadlines. As we've talked about, the deadlines are not flexible. There's not extensions. But we sometimes, again, this is confusing. We see people filing the wrong reports, particularly as a result, that initial report you got to file. There's different reports for what the owner has to file and what the operator has to file for that first initial filing. Now, the annual report obviously is only required by the operator, unless the owner wants to earn credit. So you can earn WAIRE points for your operators. We probably have a lot of great owners on this call that want to be very helpful to their tenants, and you certainly can earn WAIRE points as well. That's where another place where a custom WAIRE plan might come into effect. That if there's an owner that has an idea of ways that they want to really help their tenant, that may be a custom plan. And as we've stressed throughout this call, if anything we don't want you to do, don't miss those credits. You already have those trucks coming and going. Take credit for them. It's going to help mitigate. I can't say it's going to mitigate all your liability, but it's going to mitigate some. And it's something that's just free money that's out there, right? You just need to be tracking and taking account for it. And ultimately, what we want to reinforce, don't make this too complicated. This is really, again, it's a tax credit regime. You got to track what your tax is calculated on, which is your truck trips. You got to figure out how you're going to pay that tax. And it's as simple as that. And then if you have questions from the AQMD and audit, you maybe have to deal with those. So speaking of questions, obviously we're here to help, but there's a lot of other resources. So maybe Melinda, who's on a constant basis of helping people, even getting that one and only global extension we've gotten for all our needed filers, she can talk to you a little bit about where other sources of help are and maybe how Renaissant can help in addition.
Yeah, there's a few key resources that South Coast themselves provide. Of course, they have the AQMD website, which is where you can go to get any questions you may have, get all of the education and knowledge on what you need to do to file, be compliant. They also have a WAIRE hotline where they have a phone number and an email where the South Coast AQM team is absolutely responsive. And then, of course, you have Renaissant as a support tool as well. I have had a client reach out to me. He was having an issue calculating his WAIRE points. But it wasn't that he was doing something wrong. It wasn't allowing him to move forward in completing his registration. So he reached out to me. I tried to work through it with him, but there was something that South Coast needed to flip on the other end of their side. So I encourage all my clients, if you need support from South Coast, it is very important that you not only just email them, but you follow up with a phone call as well. I believe within a matter of an hour, South Coast AQMD responded to the email that my client sent out. He had me in CC, which goes back to the great relationship that Renaissant has built with South Coast AQMD, because maybe just seeing my company email alias might have, aided in additional, more expedited support for my client. We were able to get his issue resolved within a matter of 10 minutes. South Coast gave him step-by-step instruction on what to do in order to be able to move forward. So they were a really good resource. But Renaissant as well is also a great resource. If you're spinning your wheels with South Coast, or you're not getting any questions that you may have, whether it be complex or simple, Renaissant is also a great resource for you guys to reach out to as well.
Yeah, so what I'd like to say about Melinda said, I call that a triple play, right? That's where you're hitting all the potential help opportunities. You're talking with Renaissant, either you or Renaissant is going to that website, what information can we get off that? And ultimately, if it's needed, we'll get personally involved. We'll make that call. Obviously, you can make that call or send in that email as well. So don't be afraid to hit that triple play on trying to get your problems as it relates to WAIRE solved, because certainly we want to make it as easy on you as possible. It may not seem like it, but I believe the AQMD does try or attempts to make it as easy on you as possible. And so hopefully you don't find it to be as burdensome as you think it might be.